So I guess we'll get started. My name is Sergeant Maddie, if you don't know already. I am the Unit Training Manager here at the 735. This course was designed by other UTMs, and I think Kennan Air Force Base is where it originated. Basically, they saw and they filled it. There's really no training beyond the Air Force Trainers course that teaches supervisors what they're supposed to do per AFI when it comes to training management. And so they saw that need there and they filled it with this course. You do get a little introduction at NCOPE that's taught here on base. They do a small 30-minute segment about training management, but it's very short and sweet, 30,000-foot overview of training management. So this course is a little more in-depth and hopefully you'll find it helpful. So this course broken down into different units. These are those units we're going to be talking about today. Probably skip some of this stuff. The course, it'll probably take maybe 2 hours. I just scheduled a little more time just in case we needed it. Restrooms, of course, are behind me. Emergency evacuation. If we do need to evacuate for some reason, we're just going to exit the building in the safest manner possible and go out to the front of the building, the parking lot there, and meet up in the grassy area, take role accountability, and then just await further instruction. Introductions. Probably skip those. We will do some sort of interactive things. I'll open up TBA just to make sure everybody knows how to do certain things in TBA. So if you do, just bear with me. But hopefully it helps someone. So as supervisors, and professionally and personally, on the professional side, a lot of that deals with their training. It is ultimately their responsibility to ensure they are getting trained, but you are there to assist them to make sure that they have every opportunity afforded to them, and that we're producing quality airmen that can do the jobs that we need them to do, that the mission requires them. So it's very important for supervisors to be involved in training at all stages, not just upgrade training, but beyond upgrade training and qualification training, and just all around. So our first topic, we're going to cover CFETPs. This is a Career Field Education and Training Plan. You've probably already seen or heard about these. They are broken down into two main parts. Part 2 is kind of the bread and butter, but Part 1, this is just an example of a CFETP. Part 1 is broken down into multiple sections. Section A is just how everyone will use the plan. It's pretty generic statements in Section A. Section B has a typical career field progression for the career field. Also different duties and responsibilities that you can hold within the career field, as well as training strategies that are used to train people in that career field, and a typical career field path within that career field. Section C talks about all the qualification levels, so skill levels 3, 5, and 7, and 9 skill levels, and all the requirements required to reach those skill levels. He indicates any resource constraints that may be out there. Maybe if there's a craftsman course that would typically be required for a 7 skill level and it's not currently available Air Force wide, they would indicate that in Section D of the CFETP. And then usually that requirement would be waived until the course becomes available again. This is an example of the career field, a career pyramid. Just average so-on times for each rank, different duty positions that are held at each rank typically. It's not a catch-all, but it's a pretty good idea of what your career field does and different positions that you can hold in it. Most of them do use this pyramid diagram, but not all of them do. So yours may look a little different, but so the bread and butter part of the CFETP is in part 2. The first section of it, you'll see proficiency codes. These are the levels to which people are required to know or do things. So each task within the part 2 will have a code associated with it, and then the proficiency code key will tell you what that code means. This is an example of the proficiency code key. And I won't cover that too much. You'll have task performance levels and also task knowledge levels. So something we'll get into a little bit. If you don't have CDCs, you may have to rely on this to teach the task knowledge requirements. And you can use this CFETP Part 2 and the proficiency code key to kind of determine what you need to be teaching your 5 skill levels or your 7 skill levels. Right. And then the big part of the Part 2 is your STS or Specialty Training Standard. This is all your tasks. The task includes core tasks and deployment tasks on the job. It can be used to document on-the-job training, but most career fields now use TBA or some other means to document training. And it also has the proficiency codes listed alongside each task. This is just an example of the STS. As you can see, a list of tasks here. They'll indicate whether or not they're core tasks, 5 or 7 skill level, whether or not they're wartime tasks, qualified to perform in certain situations. Also, the area where you can use to sign off or qualify people would be here: the training start date, training completion date, training initials, and trainer initials. But again, we use digital records here. Certifier initials, if the task does require a certifier, those initials will go there. And then you start getting into the proficiency codes in these columns here. The 3 skill level, all these things are taught at the schoolhouses, the tech schools. This is the level they develop their material to, the 2B level, for example, in that first task. The 5 skill level, the CDCs are written to a certain level, so CDC writers will look at the CFETP and use that as a guide to develop their material and determine how much knowledge people need to come away with from the CDCs. And then you have the OJT column that has all your, hands-on training, proficiency skill, all was there. And the same thing for QTP, if you do have QTPs, and the 7 skill level columns as well. At the end of Part 2, you'll have additional training sources. So these will be a listing of all your formal schools that you could attend, as well as any MAGCOM specific requirements that might be out there, and any qualification training packages that have been published as well. Are there any questions about CFETPs? I know most of you have been around long enough to know what they are, but all right. All right, so one of the reasons training documentation is so important is because of this here. When a mishap occurs, QA can lock down records. No one can access those records at that point in time. So if there is improper documentation, things are lacking, it's going to be too late at that point to check for accuracy and make sure that people are actually qualified to perform what they were performing when the accident occurred. And so it's really important. In AFTC, the trainer course, we teach that you should document training as it occurs. because it's very easy to forget to document things. I've been guilty of that myself, but just document as it occurs so you don't forget, and then you wind up with a locked record due to a mishap, and then you can't really correct anything at that point. So just avoid a lot of heartache by documenting as it occurs. So in this little section, we're going to talk about master training plans, or MTPs, and kind of what they look like, how they're broken down. So a master training plan is just a guide. It's a roadmap for trainers, supervisors, certifiers to use to make sure that people are trained in the most efficient and effective manner as possible. So we develop these as supervisors, and we are required to review them annually. I always recommend that people document reviews. The AFI does not necessarily require documentation proving that you did a master training plan review. However, an inspector would probably want to see some kind of indication that you have. So I always recommend just a simple MFR or something like that. This master training plan was reviewed on this date. So a little breakdown of the master training plans. How we build one. We take a CFETP. That's really going to be the biggest core document that we use to develop master training plans, because it usually has the majority of the tasks that we perform. From that, you'll have your master training list, or MTL, will be developed. You'll assign task milestones to each task within the master training list. And then you also have to have CDC milestones documented as well. Now the AFI does prescribe 30 days per volume and all this stuff, which kind of seems like a milestone. However, you do still need to document milestones for CDCs outside of that. You need to have some kind of plan, and I have an example here that you could use, but it just needs to be published somewhere. So again, one of the core documents you'll use to gather a list, your MTL, would be the CFETP. You could also have AFJQSs and other MAGCOM requirements, local requirements that you may have specific to your work center. Maybe you develop tasks that are specific for your work center, and you need to reflect those in your master training list. Those are all sources that would be used to develop the MTL. So the goal of a master training list is to have 100% task coverage. So any task that can be performed in your work center, regardless of whether or not it's performed very often or just every now and then, needs to be outlined in your master training list and your master training plan. And then we kind of skipped ahead on this slide, but as you can see, they've already put milestones for these tasks here. You have a start month, an end month, the number of training days it'll take to teach each task, the training method and evaluation, as well as a training aid. A lot of training aids or training references can also be found in your CFETP. So when you're developing or reviewing a master training plan, you can use those as well to determine what source you're going to use to teach things with. It's just highlighting everything I just said. So CDC milestones, this is that example I was talking about earlier. If you do have CDCs or someone in your work center who is in CDCs or could be in CDCs, you need to have this documented somewhere. And I know a lot of this here in the 735 use TBA, or all of us do. There is no option in TBA to develop a CDC milestone like this. So you'll have to create some kind of external document like this and file it somewhere centrally located that everyone in your work center can access. And you can use TBA for the remainder, all your tasks within your MTP. Of course, you don't only have to use TBA. You can use external, except for maintenance, they're required to use TBA. But all the other folks here, you can do external, you can do an Excel document, a Word document, whatever you want.
There is canned journal entry statements for CDC milestones in TBA for us.
The journal entries, yes, but there's no actual milestone like this kind of breakdown. Like you can document that somebody has completed, you know, within 30 days they completed a volume or whatever, but there's nothing like this. Hopefully that makes sense.
Unattended baggage will be turned over to security forces for proper disposition. Once again, for security reasons, passengers are reminded that baggage must not be left unattended in the terminal area. We ask that you do not accept responsibility for other passengers' baggage. Unattended baggage will be turned over to security forces for proper disposition. Mahalo.
All right, and I just kind of wanted to, I'm sure you've all seen it, but I just wanted to go into TBA. I'm going to use the user practice environment, which you can find if you just go to Air Force Portal and type TBA UPE in the search bar. It'll take you to a link. You can do anything in this site if you don't know, and it won't affect anything in the real TBA. So it's a great site to use if you need practice doing something and you're afraid to mess something up. So, unfortunately, as the supervisor role in TBA is not able to do quite as much as it should be able to do, in my opinion, in terms of managing a master training plan. But it's good to know this stuff. Also, Work Center Supervisor, you could be one if you're not already. Those roles are limited, however. Per the TBA account management policy letter, we can only have 2 members assigned that role per shift per work center. But within the 735, we've changed out people like all the time. People coming and going. So you may eventually have this role and have this capability if you don't already. But with the role of Work Center Supervisor, you can manage the task within your master training plan. You can also import master training plans. This is really helpful if you have a duty position like UDM is one that I can think of right away. There's actually an AFJQS for UDMs. It's not like a separate career field, so they just published an AFJQS that you can import from another work center that you know has that AFJQS loaded to them, and you can get those tasks loaded to your MTP. You can also identify deployment tasks and manage those, as well as create and manage task groups. Task groups, if you don't know, are really helpful to assign. Let's say you could have a task group for all 5 skill level tasks and just load all the 5 skill level core tasks to that task group. And then as a supervisor, you can go in and load that whole task group to someone instead of having to add individual tasks to them. It just saves a little bit of time for your supervisors. So it's nice to do as a work center supervisor. I recommend everybody has some task groups. And then you have manage milestones. I'm currently doing a MTP review of the whole squadron, about halfway through now. And one of the common things I found was tasks missing milestones, as well as, I'm just going to pick on, I'm not really picking on it, but I don't know. You have tasks missing milestones, or you'll have tasks available from the CVTP that haven't been loaded to the work center, but should be. So those are just some common things I found. I'm not saying this work center in particular because I don't remember which work centers. Am I mirroring? because I don't remember which work centers, have the discrepancies, but this looks good. Like everything has some sort of milestone assigned to it. However, I mean, it may not be the case that this is wrong, but just be wary. This column here, I think this one, shows the task start month, and the next column would be the task completion month. So a lot of people, when they're doing this, they'll just assign the same start and complete month, number of training days, and all that to every task. It's not very realistic to do that because you wouldn't have a brand new 3-level performing a 7-level task, within their first 2 months of entering the work center. So just make sure that your milestones are realistic. It's not necessarily a fail if somebody came and inspected and saw that all those were the same, all the milestones were the same. They do need to be realistic as possible. So to change any milestones, you would just select tasks, and then you have these options up here at the top of the screen, where you can assign, a duty position level to each task. Minimum coverage, that's just the number of people, at least one person in this case needs to have this task loaded to them, or is required to perform this task. Then you would pick a training start month and completion month, a number of training days, training method, evaluation method, and then references or training aids. And then once you have all your selections, you can go through and you apply them to a certain number of tasks or certain tasks, and then you hit save milestones, and then your master training plan would be updated with the new milestones. Pretty straightforward. Did anybody have any questions or want to see anything else there?
In TBA, the milestones keep the trainee on track. So let's say they go over the milestone, is it going to turn red or yellow?
It will turn a different color. I can't remember the color scheme it uses. Again, that used to be considered a fail, like when maybe and they seal that, it would be a fail. However, it's no longer a fail. They changed the AFI to take that out of there. But again, it does say the milestones need to be realistic. So try to meet them as much as possible, but it's not going to necessarily be a fail if you don't meet the milestones.
So the milestones aren't mandatory for, like, when you add them to someone's tasks, but if they're not in there, they kind of don't have that timeline to follow, right? So it's not mandatory to have the milestones in there? Because I know a lot of people don't.
Oh yeah, it's mandatory as part of a master training plan.
I'm saying, so for each airman, so if I go in a TBA and I go to add tasks and I don't put milestones in there.
Oh, it'll be associated with the task. So you build the MTP, and then whatever you load to your people, it carries over. So the milestone will be, it'll follow that task wherever it goes. All right, another importance of documenting things as they occur in training records is that when people are maybe being recommended by their commander for separation, maybe they fail to pass the CDC exam, or they're just not progressing in their upgrade training the way they should be. Legal office and other entities will review training records to see what kind of documentation you have to pursue a separation. Right? When you're separating somebody, it's a really big deal. You're going to need a lot of proof, a lot of supporting documentation in order for legal to sign off on that. And so if you don't have it documented, you're probably not going to be looking too good. So it's also good to document strengths and weaknesses of your trainees. This helps them and you kind of keep on track If you never give them that feedback, they're really not gonna know where they stand. Just kind of gotta assume that they're probably doing okay. So if you can document, don't pick on them, don't make them cry. But if you can document any kind of weaknesses they're having, then that's a good place to go. And documentation, if you didn't already know, is one of the biggest write-ups in any training program inspection. So, all right. So this section will go over some CDC information. If CDCs are available, first of all, they're used to satisfy job knowledge, right? I view them as an extension of tech school, kind of a little more in-depth in some cases, but it's also helpful because they're actually and they're working alongside you, and they're also learning from the book when they're in CDCs. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach to make sure that they're gaining the career knowledge that they need in order to perform and progress in their career. These are issued by the UTM, myself. Before you, the supervisor, issues them to the trainee, you're supposed to review and annotate any changes that have been made. So those changes will be posted in the CDC answer key that I can provide you with if you need a copy. But at the beginning of the answer key, you'll have any changes that have been made to the CDC. They're not going to reprint a whole CDC just for maybe a couple little things they need to change in there. So they annotate changes on the answer key. It is the supervisor's responsibility to set the volume sequence of study. So you don't necessarily have to start with volume 1 if you don't want to. Sometimes it makes more sense if somebody's working in a particular section and a CDC volume relates to that section a little more. It would make sense to start them on that particular volume rather than just start in sequential order and go that way. So you can definitely go out of order if you need to. You're also required to set course completion schedule. Of course, we use CDCs and the Master Training Plan to kind of keep everything on, or TBA to document everything, and the Master Training Plan to keep everything on track. So we have that taken care of. It's pretty easy for us. Like you mentioned earlier, there are journal entry, like automated entries that you can just click on, and it'll input like this volume was completed on this day. So yes, sir.
You had mentioned that you haven't seen a CDC milestone template for any of the sections. Is that something that we could add to our MTP?
Yes, sir.
And that would cover having a CDC milestone.
Like, are you talking about your MTP outside of TBA or inside of TBA? There isn't an option there to do it.
Well, because I know that we can add like JQS tasks and create those ourselves.
Sure.
So if we could create like a CDC volume 1 with milestones in it.
Like a task?
Like a task, yeah.
I've never seen it done, but sounds okay. Sounds legal. I could double check for you because I've never seen that done. It doesn't sound like a bad idea, really. Initially,
having another tracker.
Having some other document somewhere. Sure. I'll double check. I'll look into it and see what I could find on that. All right, so a completion timeline for CDCs. This is mandated or directed by AFI. Supervisor must issue and document the issuance of the first volume, whatever that happens to be, within 10 duty days of the trainee receiving the UTM briefing. You don't have to start right away, but as long as it's within 10 days, you're good to go. Most people just start the same day, but Another rule is you can only issue one volume at a time, and trainees have up to 30 days to complete each volume. Now, they don't have to wait the full 30 days to complete a volume. They can turn them in earlier. As a supervisor, you don't want to push them to do that, but if they feel comfortable and confident in the material, have them bring in their CDC volume if they think they're done with it, and review it with them and do the URE tests and all that. If they're good to go, if 15 days in, then you could start them on the next volume. If for some reason, on the other hand, if they may go over the 30-day per volume, that does need to be documented. Just request a volume extension with myself, and we will get an extension for them. Now, it does need to be for a valid reason, maybe a mission reason or a personal issue going on at home with them. Just make sure that you have requested and the extension has been granted. It's not an issue as long as it's documented. Develop a tracking system to monitor progression. It's another responsibility of supervisors. However, we have TBA that kind of help keep track of everything, so it's a lot easier for us. Supervisors also required to review and document completion of each volume. So you have an issue date and completion date for each volume. You'll also document their unit review exercise score. So at the end, in order to be complete for a volume, there are two types of questions in the CDC, or each volume of the CDC, that have to be answered. Self-test questions, answers are actually provided in the book, but they do need to be written in by the trainee within the volume. And also the UREs. Those are multiple choice questions that you'll actually be grading when they come to turn in the volume. That's an open book test. They're really just transferring their multiple choice answers over to a score sheet, and then you could score it and see that they've got all the correct answers selected, so they're not studying the wrong material and setting them up for failure. If there are any slow progression situations, you do need to document those, as I said. Also have a corrective action plan documented as well. Get them back on track as soon as possible. I've already talked about requesting a UTM extension if needed. And then you'll just repeat this process until the last volume of CDCs is complete. Once it's complete, the AFI only requires the supervisor to do a comprehensive review of all volumes of the CDC. You'll do this by questioning them, different questions within the CDC, however you see fit. And then they're supposed to be ready to test, take their end of course exam within 45 days of them completing the last volume. So within that 45 days, the AFI says you got to do this review with them and recommend them to test, and then you would request a test through the UTM. However, in the 735, we do have additional requirements. We do some pre-testing. We do comprehensive reviews with flight leadership as well. So it's all dependent on your work center and how they want to run things, but AFI requirements are just there. So once the member tests, takes their end of course exam, you are required to document the completion of that test in their TBA record as well, and have them save the unofficial score sheet that they get printed out for them after they test, and maintain that documentation for the completion of their time in upgrade training. After they've upgraded, that particular documentation can be archived. It is actually recommended that you archive things that aren't related to your current training objective, which would be upgrade training in this case. So keep that in mind too. It kind of helps clean up a lot of clutter, because you'll see a lot of records that'll have documentation from 4 years ago when they were in upgrade training, and now they're I don't know, a tech sergeant, 7 level. So just kind of manage your program, keep on top of that. CDC failures, luckily these don't happen very often. I haven't seen one my entire time here, but if they do happen, the commander will meet with the trainee and the supervisor, usually separately, and we'll do an interview just trying to determine the root cause of the failure. And that has to be done within 30 days of the initial notification of the failure. Supervisor will also document this in their record and maintain that throughout the rest of the time that they're in upgrade training. Members will retest within 90 days of the commander interview. And then we'll go from there. If they happen to fail a second time, the process is the same for first-time failures as far as the interview process goes. And the commander's left with really a few different options they can pursue. They can withdraw their airmen from training and return to a previous AFSC if that member is a retrainee, or they can recommend that person be retrained. Of course, it's only a recommendation. Unit commander does not have final approval authority on that, but their recommendation does go a long way. Commander can also waive the CDCs, but they do have to get wing commander approval for that, so it's really just a recommendation from the unit commander, and a whole package goes up to the wing commander for final approval. And then another option, they can pursue separation. It's always something I emphasize when I do CDC briefings, is this part here. Take these things seriously. Yeah, just take them seriously, help them out, because these are the options that the commanders are left with. There is kind of a quasi fourth option, which is really just kicking the can down the road for 90 days to come back and make a decision pursuing one of the other options I just discussed. So, all right, I kind of hit on this earlier. If CDCs are not available, you should teach to the STS proficiency code level. You know, look in that 5-level column and the OJT column of that 5-level column, if that makes sense, and kind of determine what level of knowledge they should have gained from their CDC, and then teach those things to that level. And you should also document these these little sessions that you hold in their TVA record, and you'll be good to go. So at this point, we're going to have some questions. So when do you as a supervisor need to annotate any changes that were made to the CDC? Does anybody want to take a stab at that one? Hey. No.
Oh, no, it's
It would be C, yes sir. So before you actually give them the first volume, whatever volume that is, it's kind of, yeah. So before they're actually issued that first volume by you, the supervisor, you want to make sure you look over that answer key and look at the changes that have been posted, and make sure the CDC volumes get updated. Of course, they're digital, so you have to print them out and make the pen and ink changes that way, but that's all right. How many days does the supervisor have to issue the first volume after the member receives a CDC briefing from the UTM? 10 duty days, yes. Okay. Can the supervisor issue all volumes of a CDC at the same time? No? All right. One volume at a time, 30 days per volume. And can the supervisor determine order of CDC completion? Yes. All right. All right. So we talked about what happens when CDCs are available, the completion timelines that are outlined in AFI 362670, CDC failure procedures, and what happens if CDCs are not available. At this time, I think I'll take a little 10-minute break because we don't have much more material to go over, and we'll come back and finish it out. All right, welcome back. One of the other ethos, CDC documentation, really important. I've already kind of stressed that. But also, if somebody does fail a CDC, I'm going to print out basically everything that's been documented in their ITP to that point and hand it to the commander when he does his interview. He'll use that to determine whether or not proper CDC procedures were followed, and that can help him determine, how much blame really to put on the supervisor for the failure. But also documentation helps in a positive way too. Helps keep everything on track. Helps people reach a passing score. Maybe you could document some weaknesses within maybe certain volumes that you noticed. Document those things so your trainee can go and look and say, hey, yeah, I did struggle with that. So maybe I should focus a little more study time in that specific area. So just make sure documentation is thorough, and you'll set your people up for success that way. So now we're going to cover some required documentation. First, some documentation that's required for UTMs to make, as well as supervisor documentation requirements. So it is actually one of your calls, not really an outline responsibility, but something you should do is to make sure that I, as the UTM, have made the proper documentation that I'm required to. So when people come in to process, I'm required to do an interview with them, determining what their training status code is. Are they in upgrade training? Are they fully qualified? Whatever their case is. I also do an orientation with them. If they're brand new 3-level coming from tech school, this is their first base. The orientation will consist of training program overview, who's responsible for what, kind of go over the AFI responsibilities for unit commander, unit training manager, supervisors, trainers, as well as trainee responsibilities. I also have to I'm required to document CDC briefings if they are required to do CDCs, as well as upgrade completion. So when somebody does earn their 5 or 7 skill level, I'm required to document that as well in TBA. For supervisors, you are required to do an initial evaluation within 60 days of somebody being assigned to a new work center. This is to determine what they're currently qualified on, like if they are in a brand new 3-level, let's say, and ensure that they can meet their duty position requirements. So you're going to look at what they do know, what they need to know in order to perform in their new job, and then develop a training plan for them based off of that information. It gets documented in TBA as a journal entry. This is just an example. TBA, actually, when I process someone or transfer someone to a new work center in TBA, there's an automated entry like this. It gets spit out that covers everything required for the supervisor initial evaluation. These are some just more examples. This one is another requirement for supervisors. For airman and upgrade training, they're required a monthly journal entry to go over their status of training. A lot of people will make these entries and not meet the minimum requirements outlined in the AFI. They'll put something simply as I've reviewed this trainee's records for this month, or whatever it is. They won't actually go over the AFI requirements, which are outlined here on the bottom of the screen. You're supposed to include CDC and task progression, any task certification and recertification that happened within that month, as well as documenting their strengths, weaknesses, their attitude towards training. If you had any kind of negative things happen, any corrective action in these monthly journal entries as well. So a lot of people miss this, but it is outlined specifically in the AFI, showing you what you need to document. I think that's everything I wanted to point out there. For CDC documentation, I kind of covered this a little bit, but to reiterate, every volume needs an issue and completion date. You also need to document any reasons for slow progression. If there is a need for an extension beyond the 30-day, that needs to be requested first through the UTM. You need to ask the UTM for an extension on that volume, and then that needs to make sure that's documented as well. Make sure that it's actually been approved and it's good to go. You also are required to document your comprehensive review. Now for us at the 735, we have those pre-testing requirements as well. Document all those tests, the scores, the dates, and everything need to be documented as well. I don't see it on the slide actually, but you also need to include URE test scores for each volume in the documentation as well. EOC completion also needs to be documented. It does get recorded officially on a website called SIDSAR, but you do need to document it in TBA. TBA does have some features where it has the can statements, so you can make a couple clicks and it will generate some journal entries related to CDC progression. But these are just some examples that you can use as CDC completion, score, and all that stuff. All these examples I could send to you if you would like them, but if not, you can use the automated entries. Task training documentation is also required. TBA makes this really simple. You go in and give somebody a start date on something, so that gives you an open date. A close date would be when you actually sign them off on something. But you also want to document via a journal entry any strengths and weaknesses they have related to like on hands-on training, task training, as well as any reasons for slow progression in maybe core task progression. And if you ever have to decertify or recertify, first decertify someone on a task for whatever reason, you'll want to place a journal entry stating a general reason why. You don't have to be super specific. You could say maybe if it was for a safety reason they were decertified on this task. You'd also want to include in that journal entry a recertification plan and a proposed get well date for getting them recertified. And then once they're recertified on the task, you'd also want to make the documentation that they have been recertified. Any interruption to training that affects a lot of break in training, technically those are supposed to be requested through the UTM, and the UTM would sign off on that and they'd be good to go. But it does need to be documented during the SOTs monthly. I have with the commander. He's going to look at trainee progression. Somebody's 8 months into upgrade training and maybe 20% core task qualified, that might be a red flag that something's going wrong there. If we don't have a documented reason as to what that is, then kind of gonna be sitting there looking silly. So just document any issues that the trainee is having. It could be like a medical issue. If that's the case, just say for a medical reason. Don't go into specifics. You don't want to violate any kind of HIPAA law. Don't give away their information, but just get a general reason. As long as it's documented, like everything else, it'll be good to go. These are, again, just some examples related to past training documentation. All right, so if you have someone in upgrade training and they are ready to be upgraded, you need to verify that they meet all the requirements for the next skill level. So look through your CFETP and the AFECD, both which can be found on EPUBs. Those are the best sources to get those. CFETPs are available in TBA. However, you can't guarantee that those are the most up-to-date versions. TBA does have some lag time between when a new CFETP is published and it gets updated in TBA. Typically like 90 days. So just go to EPUBs, best place, safest place to get your CFETPs. And I'm sorry, AFECDs are not on EPUBs, they're on MIPERS. So review those core documents. Make sure that the training meets all the requirements, all the core task requirements, CDC requirements. If there are any, you might have Blackboard courses instead of CDCs, so make sure those are accomplished. Make sure they meet any time and training requirements. The time and training requirements document is actually posted, managed by career field managers. You can find it on MyPERS as well. Make sure they've completed any formal training schools. It'd be more typical for 7 skill levels to have a craftsman school or something like that. So if that's the case, make sure those are completed. And any other requirements that are listed in your core documents, your CFETP, the AFECD, anything that may have come down from the career field manager, make sure all the requirements have been met. And then once you've done that, you would submit the request to the UTM for the member to be upgraded. Here, oh yeah, I guess that's it. You do want to include a journal entry as well as the supervisor, saying that you're recommending the person for upgrade training. Even though you're signing Air Force Form 2096 to get them upgraded, you're kind of doing the same thing, basically recommending them by signing that form. You still need to have it documented in TBA. All right, so what is the purpose of doing an initial evaluation with your trainees? Can you guys see that okay? I think these answers are like really long. Serenzeiko? You got any idea? What letter? I'm sorry?
Do you want me to read it or do you want me to...
Oh, no, just take a guess. Yeah. Answer.
Sorry, I'm kind of confused.
What do
What's the
you...
question?
Oh, what's the purpose of a supervisor doing an initial evaluation and then documenting that?
Want me to add to it or you want me to...
Oh, no, it's a question and then there are answers
Oh, sorry.
available. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah, so when you get somebody new into your, oh, it's okay. It's on one slide, it looks crazy.
Yeah, I'm thinking like ACA and that. I see like all of it pretty much.
Oh, yeah. It's sort
ACA as a
of
whole.
related to an ACA, so you could probably do it at the same time, as long as it's within 60 days, you know. Yeah, you just want to see what they're currently qualified on. Like if they aren't brand new 3-level, then you would obviously know they're really not qualified on anything. But see what they're qualified on, and then determine what kind of training they'll need to be able to perform in their new duty position. For airman and upgrade training, we'll skip the second one because there's too many words. Airman and upgrade training, how often must the supervisor document airman's training record? Bravo? Yes. At least monthly. You can do it more, but at least monthly. And remember, there are certain AFI requirements. A lot of people miss this part. It specifically says you need to document, CDC progression, task progression, any decertification that may have happened, as well as their strengths and weaknesses related to any part of their training. All those things need to be included. If not, then it's really not adequate documentation. So when you have somebody who is in upgrade training, they're ready to be upgraded, who should you contact after you review all of their... Yes, sir. Contact your UTM. And of course, a responsible UTM is going to verify, and I hope everyone does that, but I can't speak on it. But we'll verify that all the requirements have been met. We'll look at those same core documents that you did, documentation and everything else, and then we'll go from there with the Air Force Form 2096. So you gotta, how would you open a task for somebody? Huh?
Open task with start.
Yeah. So TBA, just like, I think it just says start date or something like that, and then you enter in a date there. That'll give them a start date. If you ever have a situation too where, especially if it's not a core task, and you accidentally started somebody on a task, or it's a task that you just found out for some reason you can't train them on for a long time, maybe some equipment went down or something, they won't be able to get trained for a really long time, you can unstart the task as well in TVA. And it's always good to do. You don't want a bunch of open tasks on somebody's record because it just looks like they're not getting qualified on things. They just have things sitting there open and they're never getting trained on them. So just kind of a management piece of advice there. Make sure you're keeping track of all that. So in this unit we talked about required UTM documentation, mainly the orientation and the interview that I do, as well as the CDC briefings, as well as supervisor documentation, the monthly requirements for those that are in upgrade training, as well as it's a good idea, even if your people are not in upgrade training, to go in there and maybe do like a quarterly journal entry or something like that. Not mandated by AFI, but a good idea just to keep everybody on track, make sure that training is progressing. And we squared away. I think I said this earlier, TBA documentation or training documentation, regardless of system used, is one of the biggest write-ups in training related inspections. It's one of the biggest inspectable items because everybody who's inspecting them knows that that's one of the biggest issues, and they want to kind of decrease the amount of deficiencies. So as a supervisor, make sure your people's records are good to go. Everything's documented as it should be. Everything's regularly updated, and you'll be looking stellar. So in this section, we're going to talk about qualification training, what happens if there's changes in your career field, how to maintain training records, and then we'll hit on surveys a little bit. So qualification training, if you didn't know, so that's training really beyond upgrade training. It's designed to teach people how to perform in a certain duty position. So the idea, well, the Air Force uses the idea of continuum of learning. Basically, they want us to continue learning, right? Regardless of what our rank is and our skill level is. They want us to continue to develop ourselves professionally in our jobs, and maintain proficiencies and all that. So this is what qualification training does. It allows us to continue to develop and learn our specific positions. So as I said earlier, it's best to look for CFETPs in EPUBs because those are going to be the most up-to-date versions available. So keep an eye on them. As the unit training manager, I'm required to review all those core documents monthly, just to make sure that the unit is using the most current version available. So any changes that I notice, I'm going to immediately send out to the work center training monitors so they can further disperse that information. But as a supervisor, it's not a bad idea to double check me. Won't hurt my feelings any. It's good to keep an eye on those and make sure you're using the right CFETP. Some things to look out for when a CFETP does change are any added or removed tasks, especially those core tasks that may affect any previously awarded skill level. So you might have a situation where you're a fully qualified 7 level, a new CFETP drops that has new 5 skill level or 7 skill level core tasks. In that situation, you'd want to get trained up on those tasks as soon as possible. You'll also have to go into your master training plan and revise that because your core document has changed. So you need to make sure that that's noted within your master training plan. With the TBA lag between new CFETP and availability in TBA, it's a little hard to do. You can't force it to update, but you can go in and make sure that you're identifying anything that might need to be trained up. So when it does publish, you can have your people ready to go and ready to be trained. Records are required to be transcribed within 120 days of the CFETP being published. Of course, I could just explain with the TBA situation, that may or may not be possible, but just try to maintain that as much as you can, stick to that timetable as much as possible. If there are CDC changes, you also need to revise your master training plan because CDCs are a master training plan element. So you'll need to update those milestones and make sure that your master training plan is good to go, reflects all the most current information. And then mission readiness training, just additional training that might be out there for you guys. Time and training requirements, I talked about this earlier. Those, you can find a listing. It's published and updated regularly by career field managers on MyPers. And you can go to make sure that those haven't changed for your career field as well. All right, so maintaining training records, it is the responsibility of the supervisor to maintain records for everybody assigned to them. So if you're rating on somebody, it's your job to make sure their records are up to date. This will include their employee information. There's a tab for that in TBA if you weren't aware. Primary, duty, and control AFSCs, Secondary AFSC will be there as well if they are retraining. Their name, just rank, basic information. Make sure that's current. If it's not, and you're not a work center supervisor, you can't really do much. So you can reach out to me, the UTM, and I will get things updated as needed. Anytime duty position changes, you also want to review the records. Make sure that you have a plan in place to get them trained in that new duty position. Supervisors are also required to assign trainers. So obviously, just make sure your people have trainers loaded to them in TBA. I've seen a lot of cases where there will be like one trainer loaded to somebody. It's kind of a hindrance, possible hindrance. You want to have, a few people. That way, if somebody's out, you have a backup person available to train your troops. So keep an eye on those things as well. Verify that all journal entries and task completions have been signed by the trainee. So just log in every now and then. Make sure that they don't have a bunch of stuff that they haven't logged in themselves and signed as the trainee. That happens pretty often, but keep an eye on it and you should be good to go. And then of course, conducting the initial evaluation. We just spoke about that in the last section. Duty position, you want to make sure that they're evaluated. This is just an example from TBA showing the employee information screen. You see work center assigned date, name of work center, their immediate supervisor. Something else that happens often is a supervisor will change and TBA doesn't get updated. So make sure that information does get updated. All the AFSC information, rank, I think that's it. All right. Surveys. I know we get surveyed out a lot in the Air Force. Get tons of surveys. They are very important though when it comes to the graduate assessment surveys. Those will help you as a supervisor give some feedback to the schoolhouses, to the tech schools. Hey, these guys aren't learning what they really should be learning in tech school. They're coming here with not a lot of knowledge, not a lot of pertinent information, whatever the case is. You have field evaluation questionnaires, job inventories, task evaluations, and field interviews are some of the other surveys. Those are important too. All that input gets up-channeled ultimately to the career field manager for your career field. And they'll look at all the inputs, and when they meet to maybe review CFETP with all their friends, they will take that feedback into account and say, hey, are these people performing these certain tasks? Do we need to get rid of some tasks? Do we need to add some things? So that's why these surveys are really important for your career field as a whole. The more you participate and give honest feedback, the better off your career field manager will be to rearrange things as needed and get you what you need. I don't know if I covered this, but maybe somebody knows. When does a supervisor or a trainer begin training people and qualification training? No. You said Delta? Yes, sir. So qualification training is really, it shouldn't be the focus while somebody is in upgrade training. It should come after upgrade training. However, you can kind of combine the two. Like, it's not illegal to sign some people off on non-core tasks while they're in upgrade training. But upgrade training for like a 3-level definitely really should be a primary focus. What is qualification training? Is it D?
A.
A? Yes, it is A. It is hands-on training designed to qualify people in a specific duty position, but it can tie into upgrade training. It's really up to you, but where can you go to find a new CFETP? EPUBs, yes. That is the best place to go. So let's say a new CFETP is published and you have new core tasks or core tasks that are deleted. What do you do as a supervisor? C? Revise, yes. You want to revise the MTP, make sure that you have a plan in place. Of course, there is that lag time with TBA that I talked about, but make sure you have a plan in place to start getting people trained on those new core tasks, if there are any. I know if something's taken away, it's not that big of a deal, but who is responsible for maintaining training records? Supervisors, yes sir. And if a fully qualified airman transfers to a new work center, is the supervisor required to document an initial evaluation? Yeah, this is false, yeah. I just kind of read it differently, but yes. They do need to do the documentation and make sure people are good. All right, so this section we're talking about qualification training, what it is, you know, when to implement it, what to do when there's career field changes, which can happen through CFETP changes or CDC changes, how you maintain training records, whose responsibility it is, as well as the importance of surveys, and ultimately the feedback that career field managers get from them. So as a supervisor, when you make a recommendation for somebody to earn a new skill level, you are saying that you've ensured they met all the requirements. We talked about that a lot earlier. Remember, so make sure they're actually qualified. Don't try to rush somebody through upgrade training simply because they're at 12 months and you don't want them to show up on a slide and the commander asks questions. Make sure that they are actually qualified to perform what you're signing them off to do, and taking the time with them to make sure they really understand, because once they're qualified, let's say as a 7 level, they're expected to be that guy, right? The expert that can be relied upon. So you want to make sure that you're putting in the work, make sure they're spot on, they're where they need to be, so that we can have fully capable, fully qualified people. So just a summary of what we covered in this course. First, we started off with CFETPs, you know, how they're broken down, how they're made up. Moved on to master training plans and how they're developed, using CFETPs and AFGQSs as really the core documents to develop master training lists. And from the list, you'll assign task milestones to each task within that list. Remember, your master training list should be 100% any task that could be performed within your work center or is performed in your work center needs to be represented in your MTL. Once you have the milestones for all your tasks, you also need to have milestones for your CDCs. And then once you have all those elements, that is your entire master training plan. You also, as a supervisor, need to make sure that the master training plan is reviewed at least annually, and you'll be good to go. We also covered CDC supervisor responsibilities. Talked about how how the CDC process works, from being issued by the UTM to being issued by you, the supervisor, making sure that any changes have been made that need to be made before they start the CDC, making sure that they're staying on track, meeting the timelines. You're requesting extensions as needed as well, and you're documenting everything as you go along. We talked about upgrade training documentation and responsibilities of supervisors. So not only CDCs, but also the task progression. Strengths and weaknesses are a big missed item in those documentations. So make sure you're capturing those as well. And then we talked about upgrade training and beyond, qualification training, when people typically enter qualification training, what it is, how it's managed, and all that. So again, this course was designed because I know when I became a staff sergeant that nobody really showed me any of this stuff. It was all trial and error, sorry, and you just kind of had to look through the AFI and dig through it yourself. And so UTMs came up with this course. Hopefully it's helpful to some folks. It's kind of a one-stop shop, all the information you need. You can verify this. You can go to the AFI yourself. AFI 362670, Chapter 4 in particular, deals with all the training management, training program stuff, as well as if you're maintenance, you'll have 2650. Get my AFIs messed up. AFI 362650, which I have additional maintenance training related management stuff in there as well. But if there are no questions, I think that's a wrap.